So in this chapter, we're looking at what exactly is action research. And the questions that guide us, of course, is to define action research and the stages of that, and what methods are available for your action research, and why do teachers conduct action research, or should they conduct action research, and what is CAPES and how can it be used to frame action research, and of course that's an acronym. So in terms of research in the age of accountability, all of us are required to take data. So we're actually collecting data. We're actually on a daily basis as teachers doing research anyway. We are required to do research. And we do research to the main reason, of course, to improve our instruction and to look at the benefits of what we're using as far as curriculum and teaching methodologies and teaching practices. And so there are great benefits to collecting data, as we know. There's a lot of history leading up to accountability, but in any event, I think what's important for us to know is that it's important for us to take data anyway, and I believe that despite policies, regulations, laws, teachers have always collected data. So, you know, a lot of times when we think of research, we think of this really difficult process that involves statistics and, oh, we don't really do research, we don't have time to do research. But the reality is very, very different. And there's a lot of ways to collect data and to take a look at that data and to ask questions in our classroom and figure out a way to answer those questions. So data is already available to you in the form of tests, quizzes, homework assignments, your own observations. A lot of teachers are taking antecedent behavior consequent data or anecdotal notes on children, homework assignments, work samples, conferences, surveys. We can continue to add to this list. So what is the goal of research? Well, the goal is to inform us, of course, to educate us, to answer any questions we might have, to prompt new questions, to help us to reflect and to discuss, to challenge what we do, and to clarify situations. So the important thing, the difference in terms of taking our data and making it purely research is that it's a systematic process when it's research. So when we design an action research project, we are making sure that it's systematic, that it's designed in a way to answer a specific question or questions so that we can draw conclusions. So teachers are already problem solvers. They're already deep thinkers. We continue to be lifelong learners and asking questions. And we're also collaborators, and a lot of times research is done in a collaborative group or in pairs. I don't know that we need to necessarily shift our mindset because, again, I think we just need to realize that we already do research in our classrooms. But we need to, there's some really good points here in that we need to be taking advantage of the data in our classrooms and really essentially going through the process, the research process, so that we can draw conclusions from that data. So how is it defined? Well, action research is defined here as a process that simultaneously combines experimental approaches for research with social programs while advancing both theory and action for research and social progress. So that says a little bit, well, actually it says a lot, I should say. But really what we're saying here is that it's a systematic process. You can use experimental approaches. You can use both qualitative and quantitative approaches. You can use mixed methods approaches. But you're beginning with a question. There are stages that you go through in the process. You're testing out your data and your hypothesis, and you're executing and coming up with some conclusion. Here's another model of our definition of action research, and I think the important things here are already said. You're You're planning, you're reflecting, you're developing your steps, you're monitoring, you're evaluating. And we have another model here that's explained in detail. So the researchers in action research are really direct participants. So unlike, complete experimental research where you may be purely an observer, you're definitely participating. It requires you collecting data. It also starts small to create conclusions and expands upon those conclusions. So here's a good model in terms of how action research is performed. We plan, we act, we observe, we reflect, and we could go on and on and on, because the result of our action research usually is more questions as well. We have a lot of models here. So you could be using a quantitative research model, quantitative methods to collect your data. You do not have to, but some common approaches to quantitative research are you're proving or disproving a hypothesis, you're utilizing computation of measurements, you're graphing things, there's some type of statistical analysis, even if it's simply descriptive statistics, that's okay. There are some advantages to using quantitative research, and there are some disadvantages as well. If you're just getting a number or a couple numbers, the depth of the information could be limited. A lot of times teachers use mixed methods, both quantitative and qualitative research. In qualitative research, you're using a lot of description, note-taking, analysis, and you don't have a single value of comparison. So sometimes, unless you're really clear on your question and what you're looking for, it can get a little messy. And so you have to be careful with qualitative research as well in terms of your design. So action research is a method to improve your teaching and the child's learning. It bridges the gap between theory and practice. It's research done by teachers, and the research impacts our practice as teachers. And there's an opportunity to assess and improve our teaching as a result. It can be a very empowering experience because you can really find answers to the questions you're asking. It's relevant to your classroom. Again, it's systematic. You're doing a planning and observing and coming to conclusion, and it could improve practice and student learning simultaneously. So the goals of teacher action research are to help teachers to make decisions about their teaching and learning in their classroom, improve classroom and school practice, encourage teachers to see themselves as producers of educational knowledge. It allows teachers to clarify, elaborate, and modify theories that inform teaching. And participants then reflect on a situation or practical issue, develop a plan to address this, use data to explore the changes, and examine and reflect upon the effectiveness of the approach. Where can action research take place? Anywhere. It can take place in any classroom. It can take place in the school-wide. It can take place with one or two children, wherever there is a question to be answered. So again, here is another model. Students focusing on, this is a very actual example related to a specific child's working on decoding. So the question the teachers ask, how do I get my students to understand what they read? And so a colleague tells the teacher about Reader's Workshop, and the teacher decides that she or he is going to observe and interview the students and keep a reflective journal, so a lot of qualitative data. And then the teacher evaluates that data and reflects on it and acts and essentially changes the classroom and teaching if needed. Who conducts action research? A teacher acting alone, a group of committed colleagues can, and a partner, teacher in a pair. A lot of models here. Essentially, I think we've gone through these, but they do help us to think about, just what action research looks like. So CAPES is our last thing to cover here, and the acronym stands for Context, Action, Product, Evaluated, Standards. And so using the CAPES framework, again, I think this is just really a model that helps us to think about what we have to do as teachers and how we can use research and action research to evaluate what we do. So in the context, we're activating prior knowledge and establishing real-world connections, real-world questions about our classroom and our teaching. We're applying the theory we know to actual practice. What is the product by the primary sequence of actions performed to complete the tasks? So what are we looking for? Evaluating, deciding the quality or qualities of the product, and standards framed for what is expected at each step in the research process. So helping us through essentially a standard or model of action research. And that takes us through this particular PowerPoint. Okay, and Camtasia did not work.